Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is Aarti Kohli. I'm the Executive Director of Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus in San Francisco. I am so pleased to have you all here. I don't know about you, but I've been on an emotional roller coaster if just this past month, but it feels like for almost 4 years. And I actually was reflecting back to when I first joined Asian Americans Advancing Justice in 2014, 6 years ago. I was in a room with Sue Van, Stuart Kuo, Sanjui Kumar, who was the board chair of the new affiliate, Advancing Justice Atlanta, and Helen Ho, who was the ED at that time. And I didn't realize that it was a historic moment. You know, I would have paid more attention if I had known. We had just agreed to support and seed Advancing Justice Atlanta as a partnership and provide both some financial resources and technical support. And I just think back in 6 years, which is, you know, if you think about the movement for social justice, it's a very short period of time. This organization has become a powerhouse. And, you know, I give a lot of credit to folks who saw the need and the potential. And I think, you know, this is what I'm seeing at this moment too, is so many of you turning out, investing in our communities, doing solidarity work with Black, Latinx, Indigenous folks. And this is what's made the difference in this election. And I can't, you know, my gratitude for you and our communities is just overflowing. And that's what keeps me positive when I think about all the people who supported hate, you know. And I'm in California. We had our own moment of, in the 90s with Prop 187, which was an incredibly anti-immigrant measure. And we saw the shift. And what made the difference in California, and I think what's going to make the difference in this country, is the investment in communities on the ground, the investment and lifting up of directly impacted folks. And so I'm so grateful to be a part of this endeavor. And I'm excited about today's conversation where we lift up some of the great work that's been happening across the country. I know there's so much more. And we also start the conversation about, as we build our community's power, what are we building towards? What are we trying to achieve? And can we work through the complexities together? So I want to hand it off to John Yang, who has been a great partner in this fight. And I'm excited to be here with all of you. Thank you. Oh, let me also mention, this is being recorded, just for your information.
Thanks, Aarti. And it gives me great pleasure to work with you and working with all the affiliates. As many of you know, I'm the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAAJ-C, which is the DC affiliate in our affiliation. And I think Aarti captures it well in terms of this moment that we are in. You know, I'm sure that all of us are feeling the same way. We go through our highs and lows over this past month, even in this cycle of one day, 24 hours, 12 hours, we go through a high and a low thinking, okay, it seems like we've achieved something. And then feeling like, well, what exactly have we achieved? And so we really wanted to use this space today to start exploring some of this. This is just the start of a conversation, right? To explore sort of where we are in this moment, celebrate the successes, because clearly we have had some successes, but then also start this conversation about where we want to go from there. What are some lessons learned? What are some of the things that we see, each of us see in this ecosystem in terms of this march towards justice, this march towards progress. So I'm excited to be part of it and, you know, to start this dialogue. So we're going to format this in 2 sections, as you may have seen. The first section is to focus in on Atlanta and Wisconsin and the success stories there, the organizing there, and sort of how that lifted up to clear victories in both of those states. And then the second half is to have an internal conversation among the affiliate executive directors about some of the other things that we've seen during this election cycle, some of the successes, but also some of the barriers, some of the takeaways from all of this. So excited to be part of this. From here, I will turn this over to Becky Belcourt. Many of you guys know Becky. She is Executive Director of NAKASEC, wonderful partner of ours, our affiliation with our Value Our Families campaign as part of the ecosystem of Asian American progressive organizations. So with that, and her bio is in the chat as well. So with that, Becky.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, John. And it's really an honor to be here with the Asian Americans Advancing Justice Network. Thank you so much for having us. And as we all know, Asian Americans, we are the fastest growing racial group and electorate in the country right now. And so I think that obviously translates into that we are going to have an increasing impact on elections, and that becomes especially important in battleground states like we're going to highlight here today. Our folks actually just returned ourselves from the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where we were running a campaign of Korean Americans statewide and young Asian Americans in particular geographies. And our community there made a difference, just as they did as well in Wisconsin and in Georgia, which we're really, really excited to hear about today. Yeah, and so one of the reasons that I wanted to do this was because I've been very excited myself to hear from Stephanie and from Chai about the amazing work that's happened in both Georgia and in Wisconsin. And so just, yeah, thank you so much for all that you have done and being such incredible leaders during this time. So I'm just going to start by asking a first question. And if folks have questions as we go through this panel, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be looking out for them. We can add your question in. But just as a first question, it can often seem like this work can kind of just come out of a vacuum because elections happen in particular years. But we as organizers know that it's often the result of years of work that's come before. So would you mind sharing a little bit about what your organizing work has looked like over the past few years that kind of built it up to the place where you could run the kind of campaign you did this year? So why don't we first start with Chai? Would you like to introduce yourself? And then if you could share about that question, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Becky. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be on with you all today. My name is Chai Moua, and I am the Community Power Coalition Director here at Freedom Inc. in Wisconsin. I think over the past few years, at the beginning, we started as the state convener, culture state convener in Wisconsin in 2016, right before, like a couple months right before the 2016 presidential election. And so the past few years has really been learning, but we always knew that kind of the same as the culture model that we wanted to grow and support organizations. And that the stronger Asian American organizations we had in Wisconsin was the stronger the power building that we could do. And so we, in Wisconsin, because our Asian American communities are so spread out throughout the state of Wisconsin, we actually had to find and build partner and coalition throughout the whole state of Wisconsin. So what that really looked like was really strengthening our Asian American organizations in Wisconsin. Many of the organizations that we started funding, some were very brand new. Some from the last 4 years have went from $200,000 annual budgets to now more than $500,000 to $600,000 annual budgets. And so really building the capacity of these organizations so they could really build in their communities. We also knew that in Wisconsin, outside of Madison and Milwaukee, there were no other support for other communities of colors. So our Asian American, or predominantly in Wisconsin, our Hmong groups and their organizations were also the ones that could reach these other communities of color. And so we started using the Freedom Inc. model of building Black and Southeast Asian liberation and teaching our partners how to do that. And so we've seen in the last couple of years that partnership has strengthened, and we've seen it play out in the historical Wisconsin win, right? We see 6 out of the 7 counties that we had funded partners in turned out progressive voters. We weren't interested in the one-time voters, but we wanted to make sure that we were turning out lifetime socially conscious voters, folks who really understood what mattered to them when they went to the polls. On top of that, we've also seen our organizations, while this year mutual aid has been big for a lot of organizations, all the organizations we funded and Freedom Inc., we've always done mutual aid work. So our theory of change has always been that we take care of our communities first before we could even talk to them about the electoral process, before we could talk to them about community power building. And we've seen how that has tremendously come into play this year, especially during the pandemic. And then I think like, because we've been doing that trust that we built in the communities over the last couple of years, and us being visible in the community has really helped us be able to reach communities and have quality conversations during an election season like this, where we can't knock on doors anymore, we can't have our usual gatherings anymore. And also, I think the other big thing I wanted to say out of Wisconsin is because of the trusted partnership that we had in the spring election that we had here in Wisconsin, we saw everything changing minute by minute. And we were getting different news every day about if we were going to have an election or not, or how folks could vote by mail or not, that we became a trusted source for our community for information. And that was partially because of the years that we've been building to be there.
All right, thank you. Yes, and that's an excellent point that a lot had to pivot to because of COVID. So thank you for sharing about that. Stephanie, would you be able to address the question?
Yeah, well, thank you. And Chai, I echo a lot of the same thing about building the infrastructure, being out beyond AAPI, building trust in the community ahead of time, right? So this moment of 2020 is also, you know, surprising and sort of hard to, what's the word, internalize a little bit, I think. So I will say that just because I moved to Georgia from California 7 years ago. And so it was really quite a shock to me about the lack of infrastructure in the Asian American communities here. And I think one of the things that this organization did, along with so many others, is to really build and become good coalition partners throughout the years. Build coalitions that were multiracial, that were multi-ethnic, that also brought in smaller ethnic associations to get involved in civic engagement work, like pretty early on. So, and to give you a sense of the lack of infrastructure here in Georgia, for voting purposes, everything's in English for the most part. And so except for one area that's in Spanish. And then just this year we won in one county, Korean for a sample ballot, information and voting, you know, and materials, FAQ, that kind of stuff. But I think when we're looking at sort of the growth and what has to happen here, it's such a tremendous lift here. And the Asian American community has really come of age over the last 5 years. So for us, it's really building that, that infrastructure and helping other groups on the ground, being able to give mini grants and fund up different spinoff organizations as well. We have communities group around a Q&A, like a queer Asian group that we started up. We also are a fiscal sponsor of like a YouTube channel for civic engagement. We also spun off what was really important to us was a C4 structure. We kept losing over and over and over. There kept being multiple years of anti-immigrant bills that we were just fighting back, and we were never able to move anything pro. And so we were just tired of it, and we were like, we need new people in these positions. And so we were able to build the C4, and our first campaign out of the C4 was Asians for Abrams, for Stacey Abrams. So I think it's just having that mindset of coalition building and doing solidarity work from the very beginning, I think helps a lot. And then for us, it's creating a political home and organizing base for Asian Americans here in Georgia and the Southeast. You can be involved in so many different ways. It's not just about civic engagement. It's also working on getting ICE out of, Gwinnett. It's also working on communities over capitalism. It's doing mutual aid work. It's doing work in our legal clinics, right? There's so many different ways that people can get involved, and it isn't just one way. We also have like a spoken word mic night too, so like we've spun off like a whole bunch of different things because this is how people get active, right? The numbers are also like incredible, which I can talk about later, but really it is that fundamental thing of creating trust in the community, being that resource in language, multiple different languages. When people have questions, they know they can come to you because they know you're going to get the right answer. And so it was increasingly hard in this year to make sure that we were giving accurate information as fast as we could when things were changing and being dynamic, but we were trying to do that. That's why we used billboards with QR codes and like all these different ways. We had, hand sanitizer with a bunch of information on with different languages. And I think just being out in the community as safely as possible, I think was really helpful. We were also able to give out PPE to a lot of different other organizations in the field too. So I think just being a resource has really helped a lot.
Yeah, Stephanie, and I just want to chime in and say, like, our big thing really was our We Keep Us Safe campaign, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like jumping off of the whole uprising during the summer and saying you met us in the street, now meet us at the polls, but also like we keep us safe, right? We keep us safe from police, we keep us safe from ICE, but we also keep us safe during this pandemic and the PPE and being in the communities in the safest ways when nobody wants to be in our communities. I think that was the best part of our community building.
Definitely. That's so good to hear.
Yeah, it sounds like both of your organizations were so smart in kind of taking in the current moment that we're in, both with COVID and the movement for Black lives and the uprisings, and making that relevant within the work that you were doing. And so and I know you also mentioned the importance of language access and working in coalition. So I know, Stephanie, as you're looking towards, I know you probably can't believe it's not over yet, and now you're having one of the hugest elections coming up very soon on January 5th. But as you look forward, are there other things that you had tried out in terms of organizing in our Asian American community that you found worked really well that you would are looking to do in the near future or in the next elections?
I think in 2019, we decided to do deep canvassing versus any other kind of organizing. We did other organizing work too, but in terms of our canvassing, we just switched it completely to that, which I think really helped a lot to have really quality conversations with people. It helped build up our base. We started having more interest in our base meetings that we would have like every month. And so I think that really sort of helped a lot. We just started, I think 2 months ago or 3 months ago, doing canvassing just on the communities over capitalism work that we were doing as well, and working with some students and some young people around getting getting police out of, well, ICE too, I guess, police out of their schools, out of their high schools and elementary schools right now in Gwinnett. And I mean, we're looking at sort of the, future of like where we would want to go is that base is like the most important, right? To keep educating and talking to the base. Because I think that's what made the difference between 2019 when we were all completely out, really, really out in the community, but we were slowly building those contacts more, to 2020 where we thought we were going to be out. Everybody thought we were going to be out doing these huge things. But if we didn't take that time in 2019 to really build that up and have those quality conversations and organize, then I don't think we would be in a place where we are in 2020, when we couldn't actually have those conversations now, because scrambling later, as everyone knows, it just doesn't work if you never had those conversations in the first place.
Okay, thank you. We have had a question that's come in from folks who are watching. And so, young people, of course, can play a huge role in any election and in any movement. What would you say from your experience has been the best way of partnering with young people in terms of building and sustaining movement, both within and outside of election cycles? Chai, would you like to answer first?
Yeah, I can. At Freedom Inc., we've been thinking about that a lot. And so we, we've established our leadership pipeline, which includes like bringing in young folks and helping them develop and helping them figure out where to go. And this, I would just say, like, our work in the city of Madison and Dane County, and our partners' work wouldn't happen without, we wouldn't be successful without the young people in this leadership pipeline. And the way that we bring young folks in and mobilize them, just in Madison alone this time, my leads, I had 10 leads, mutual aid and field team leads, who were all college students, like sophomore and juniors in college. Sophomore and freshmen in college, and how motivated they were, I think, and using them to build off our wins. So when we won our No Cops in School campaign back in July, that really motivated our young folks, and it was really letting them take the lead and saying, what else can you do? Who else can you bring? And really building that into our leadership pipeline and say, at each event, can you please bring 2 of your friends? And then giving incentives in ways that would mean personal development for them, which I think that really built up to having enough folks in this past election to election defend. We had, for them to build their base, and brought in over 100 people to election defend for us in the state of Wisconsin, in the city of Madison itself. So, but also I think what it also is showing our young folks that actually we didn't have to empower them, and we didn't have to give them power. Like, that was all within them. They just had to learn how to use it. And this time around, them seeing how essential they were during the spring election to making sure that their elders voted. Because for Hmong folks, voting in person is our preferred way of voting. So this whole vote by mail or vote early, it was so foreign to them. And so really allowing these youth to do what they knew how to do best, going door to door and saying, put your phone outside, let me connect you to Zoom, put your ID outside and your phone, and then I'll send your picture in for your ballots. And having them come up with those innovative ways of how they were gonna do things. I think that was really essential into us really bringing in a big base of youth leaders this year.
Just to give some context about where the youth vote was in the estimated youth vote here, because we're still counting, it went up 28%. Early voting, sorry, it's 123,000 cast early voting, and then 34,000-ish were cast by 18 to 35-year-olds. So 28% of that was the youth vote, which is great. And I would say young people really, took over certain social media around the election, which I think was amazing. And so I think that energy just brought something really great to it. Also, our staff, not to call myself out, I guess, but I'm almost the oldest person on our staff. So for the majority of our staff, especially in our civic engagement and organizing, I think the oldest person possibly is 27. And so when we're thinking about ideas about how to do outreach, those ideas and that energy is definitely coming from them. And so I think it's just really elevating and saying, yes, go with those ideas instead of like stifling it. Like what Chai's saying is like, they already have it, right? We just have to like, be like, yeah, go ahead, just do it. Like we have some money, so not like, just make it happen. I think, and believing in the power of young people and their ways of thinking about how they want to see things. Also their ideas about like, messaging is really, really effective too. So it's like just trusting in that leadership of young folks.
Okay, unfortunately, I can't believe it. We only have a few more minutes. And so I will follow up with both of you. I have so many more questions myself, but just as our last question, so the impact of your work on the federal election is pretty clear. Like Wisconsin was one of the first states, battleground states that was called for the presidential election. I know Georgia is still being counted, but obviously the Senate seats are going to have a huge influence on what's going to happen legislatively next year. And so, but also our votes obviously make a big difference at the local level. So could you each speak just a little bit about what impact the Asian American vote had on your local elections as well?
Yeah, I think I can speak first. You know, in Wisconsin, it was very important for us to keep some of our progressive lawmakers or legislators in office. And we've seen that, but we're a 501c3. And so what we really had to do this time around was really get the information out to our communities about what's been going on this whole year and who's put us, just throwing questions out there for folks to think about. Who, think when you go to the polls, think about who has put our lives at stake. Who put our lives in danger and all of that. And so we always talk in Wisconsin about how if in these counties where we had API and communities of color, if every community of, if every person of color voted, these counties could flip and these districts could flip. And so we always really talk about how important that is. And that's why I think like for us, it was so important locally for the local elections, that we had local partners that folks trusted and not us as, you know, a state organization or not another national organization coming in and saying, hey, listen to us. But we were building these local partners who knew what was going on in their small villages or towns or cities, right? And we've seen how that, and we've also, I think, taken statistics from other city elections and say, hey, look, when this API candidate was up, you all turned out and vote and look what happened, right? Like this is the margin. And here in a state election, if you all turned out and vote, like what else could happen? You could really be living the way you could really be voting for the dreams that you want to live in. And so I think, yeah, the presidential election, it was hard. I mean, I think it's harder to see what our actual impact is, but the state elections, we can see what the impact of our community's voting really is. And again, like I said, in all of the counties that we've done work in, we've seen how, yeah, how the votes are coming in and which seats are open and which ones got flipped, but.
In Georgia, the biggest or the largest immigrant or people of color county is Gwinnett. It has dramatically changed. It's where our office is. It's where majority of Asians are. That commission, I think in 2016, used to be an all-white commission. Now it is, I believe, all people of color now, starting in January, which is very exciting. There's one Asian American, the rest are Black. All of those folks are people that we've known from the community. They've had local seats, city council seats before, or worked in local government, and then now are doing commission seats. That's going to dramatically change. Our sheriff also changed in Gwinnett as well. They had already made a commitment to say that they would get rid of 287G, the agreement with ICE. So we know that 287G is now dead in Gwinnett, which is huge. Yes. And then we have a school board. We had a school board of mostly was all white, and it was mostly older folks. The average age was like 70. And so now we have a school board with people with that have kids, you know, in school. And I think it's either half people of color or just one over majority people of color in the school board too. So we look at somewhere like Gwinnett, where it could be the future of local elections or the future of it, we see that there is some real change for Georgia. And so sometimes people think like, you know, supporting Black candidates, does that also help Asian Americans? And yes, the answer is yes. Especially if they're from the community, especially if they've already outreached and did information in so many different languages. You know them, you know that they're an advocate for you and your family. I think that that's huge. And just to I can't say this enough, is, you know, particularly in Georgia, Black women are, you know, the standard of where everybody else needs to be in terms of voting. So Asians, we need to step it up. And same with white women need to step it up big time in the state of Georgia. And I would also say the Latinx community too. So we all have some work to do on our end, but we really need to step it up to Black women.
Yes, amen to that. Thank you. Thank you both so much. We know you're so busy. And again, we really, really appreciate your leadership and all that you have done and are doing now. And I know Stephanie's organization is also having a briefing next week. Stephanie, maybe if you wanted to share information for folks to register in the chat. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more and learning more from both Freedom Inc. and Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta soon. So thanks so much for taking your time and being on this panel. And I'll pass it back to Aarti from here.
Thanks, Becky. I'm going to hand it off to Andy Kang, the Executive Director of Advancing Justice Chicago.
Thanks so much, Aarti. And Stephanie, thanks for sharing. Thank you for all of that. I mean, it's my family's immigration story starts in Atlanta. My father going to undergrad there back in the 50s. So it's just inspiring to see the immigrant community and the African-American community coming together and mobilizing. So I've been tasked with facilitating this next section, and we're going to try to, you know, fold our reflections between Aarti, John, and Connie and myself about the election we just saw. Some of it, obviously, we just mentioned is still ongoing, but also try to take a peek into 2021. I hope we're all ready for next year, at least starting to, you know, dip our toe in there and think about and talk about some of the things that we're on our minds of the group. And, you know, I'm going to start with a very basic question, you know, for the group to consider. And what are some of the reflections that you have from your organization's perspective on achievements, but also, you know, the role that you played in the outcome of the election? I'm going to start the ball rolling with Connie from Advancing Justice LA.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. So from Advancing Justice LA, some of the things that our organization did is we had poll monitors in Orange County and LA at voting centers that have high Asian Pacific Islander populations. And we had 45 volunteer monitors who were in 120 poll centers during the election time. We also had an Asian Pacific Islander voter helpline. So we answered calls in 6 different languages for folks who had questions about how to mail in their ballot or any other kinds of procedural questions at the time. And then we were part of the national work of Advancing Justice of all of our affiliates to do the Get Out to Vote calls throughout the country. So in high API areas. So those were some of the things that we did, and what we looked for were things where there were areas of maybe language access, where materials were not being available in all the translated languages they were supposed to be in LA or Orange County. We did have some situation of, you know, a voting center that, a group that posed to have a voting center that was not, and one of our Asian immigrant communities was a high density, lived in that area. So we made sure we provided materials in language and on the radio to explain, like, this is not a voting center, and to provide them information of how to find their closest local one. So those were some of the things we did. But in terms of what our role is in the outcome in the election, I think, you know, I come from the perspective that Advancing Justice as a national affiliation, in a lot of ways, we are the group that the Asian Pacific Islander community is looking for as a progressive voice. And when it comes to the elections and making sure that our Asian Pacific Islander community is heard, I think we have a broad national reach because we have 5 of us here. And so I think of us as really being an important group to sort of, for the progressive movement and for Asian Pacific Islanders to think about when they're looking for who to go to, who do we get information from, who do we count on to protect us during this time. So that's kind of where I think generally about our role.
Great. John, you care to jump in and add to that?
Sure, and let me sort of take a step back also just to talk about what this election cycle looked like, because I know all of us are looking at a lot of data. We're wondering about sort of, did Asian Americans make a difference and all of that. And so some data that I would emphasize is, the Asian American population, again, in the 2020 election voted, overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. And it depends on what exit poll you're looking at, whether it's the Asian American Decisions election night exit poll that showed it at 68-28, ALDEF had one at 67-30. The report produced by Edison, which is picked up by CNN and some of the other major media, said 61-34. One thing I would ask our community to be conscious of is, so there's sometimes a narrative that Asian Americans have shifted a little bit towards Trump because that poll in 2016 showed a 65-27 split towards Clinton. I would question whether that is actually statistically significant because, as all of us know, it depends on who they polled within the Asian American community. The data that all of us has shows that the Vietnamese American community and the Filipino American community is a little bit more closer with respect to the splits between, Democrats and Republicans. So if they quote unquote oversampled in those communities as part of the overall Asian American mix, you're going to get a different result. The other highlights I would say at the national level, if you will, Asian American youth went 83-19 for Biden. So that's an overwhelming number, right? And that goes to what Stephanie was saying about sort of engaging the youth being an important aspect of what we're doing. And then sort of if you go down to the numbers in terms of these battleground states, I mean, obviously all of these battleground states have 4% or higher Asian American populations. And so if it's a 4% or higher population and you have a split of 2-to-1, clearly we can say that we are the margin of difference. Even there though, in terms of narrative, I would suggest we be careful. We should claim that we did our part in this election, but we are part of a community that did that, right? As Stephanie said, the Black voters in particular, Black women that really showed up, made a huge difference. Latino voters made a difference. Women voters made a difference. All of us contributed to that result. So we shouldn't shy away from that. Last thing in terms, or 2 things I would say. One is with respect to what it looks like in Congress, as we know, Democrats will have lost a few seats. With respect to Asian Americans, we should be at about the same number. There's one uncalled race in California, TJ Cox. And then there's one race that a Republican Asian American woman won, a woman named Michelle Park Steele in California. This is going to be the first time we've had an Asian American Republican in Congress in 10 years. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. Obviously, we've lost one Asian American in the Senate, Kamala Harris, but that's okay. We're happy about losing that one. But it speaks to what our power dynamics will look like in DC going into the future. And then the last thing I would say in terms of what the work that all of us have done, very proud of that in terms of what all the affiliates have done. Part of the things that we do are provide fact sheets for everyone. I know a number of you guys use them, translated into 12 different languages, like 12 different Asian languages related to everything from COVID-19 safety to sort of different ways of voting. And then we had a hotline that we ran nationally along with APIA Vote. We had over 4,400 calls during this election cycle. And it was a lot of the calls were what you would expect, questions about polling places, questions about early voting. But again, it shows the need for language access during this time. So let me stop there.
Great, thank you. And Aarti, I know California was very, very busy this this election season, so please share.
Yeah, we think of voting, it's not just about voting, civic engagement for us. I mean, our work started with census, right? And to make sure that we reached out to our communities to engage them. And then we immediately switched from census to GOTV and voting rights and poll monitoring. We had over 300 poll monitors and over 13 counties. I mean, I think the thing to know about California, and I think for people outside of California, there is this perception that we are this progressive state with, where everything is great. We have progressives in the legislature, we get, we can push policies in here that we can't push in the rest of the country. Unfortunately, if you look at some of the ballot measures, particularly the one on, we have a ban on affirmative action in California, and there was a proposition to undo that ban, and that failed. There was a proposition for gig workers basically no longer having protections as employees, and that won. We had a proposition on taxing corporations to have more investment in low-income communities and schools. That lost. So, we're not this mecca of, where all progressive liberal policies pass. And one of the things we're noticing about Asian American communities, at least, and if you look at the votes on those propositions, it was all the coastal areas and the big urban populations like in San Francisco or LA. The Central Valley, the Inland Empire, where TJ Cox's race is being run, Orange County. I mean, these are areas where we have a lot of Asian Americans and growing demographics of our communities where, it's still not clear how those folks are coming down on our issues. The issues that actually did win, there were 2 criminal justice measures that won in California. And you can see, and I could probably point to, when I think about the organizations that turned people out on those measures, and like in Sacramento County or in the interior of California, you see that the organizing and the investment and education in around these issues paid off. And what was so disturbing for me is, for the affirmative action measure, and actually even for the gig drivers measure, they appropriated social justice language. The sign said, "Don't divide us. No to racial discrimination." I mean, that's the framing for opposing affirmative action. So my reflections are that I'm very proud of the work that we've been doing in California. There's an amazing network of organizations that have been doing organizing throughout California, including in the Central Valley. But we really need to sharpen our narratives. And I think that's one of the questions, is that our communities in particular are targeted by conservative forces. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
No, Aarti, that's a really important point, and I'll sneak in my thoughts, and then I'm going to come back to you for the second question. But here in Chicago, in Illinois, we had for the first time in Cook County, which is suburban Chicagoland, but also city of Chicago, for the first time Korean, Arabic, Tagalog, Gujarati, Urdu, but also Polish, Ukrainian, and Russian on translated ballots in the suburbs, which was really exciting. Unfortunately, our poll watching operation was impacted by COVID. We also saw, our Asian American State Caucus down in Springfield, which when I started this work, we had 0 Asian American electeds in the state house. We're moving from 3 to 5 now. And I think I just saw from Stephanie, they're going to have 5 Asian American legislators as well. So, that's exciting. I would say, to your point, we were trying to pass a constitutional referendum to put in place what's called a fair tax or a progressive income tax. A lot of money was spent by some billionaires in the state. It created a lot of confusion and misinformation. To that framing point, Aarti, I think a lot of people were confused, even our lower income folks, that they thought that maybe this would raise their taxes when in fact it was going to give them a tax cut. And so we did fall short on that one. And I think it just goes to your point. We have a lot more work to do to start earlier, to try to combat some of the misinformation that we know is coming from a lot of different sources that oppose all the progressive ideas that we'd like to see in reality. But kind of picking up on that, and we're inching even closer and closer into 2021. For you, Aarti, how do you think about how we integrate the organizing, the advocacy, litigation to ensure that we have a stronger push for influencing that long-term change that we all want to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give an example of how we do it and how we've done it in California. So for us, it took a decade of organizing around sanctuary policies, and we started at the city level, right? So it was tested in San Francisco. Actually, I think Governor Newsom was mayor at the time, and we got a lot of pushback even in a liberal city. And we actually, helped sort of educate legislators city by city. And so when the Trump administration came into power, it was the state legislature that reached out and said, we want to do something at a state level. And we were ready because we had tested these policies at the local level. We had organized at the local level. So then and we had created an ICE out of California coalition with organizers in over 50 counties. That's like, unprecedented. So we were able to turn that into the California Values Act, which is our state sanctuary law, which is a cutting edge bill, which really separates local police from ICE. Once we have that bill, we need local police to actually, and we needed the legal mechanism to hold them accountable. And what we have found is we've now started filing lawsuits in cases where local police are unlawfully funneling people to ICE, and we are now holding them accountable. So this whole, this was an integrated campaign and coalition work that continues where, we use organizing to get the policies in place. Once the policies are in place, we use litigation to ensure that those policies are implemented. And when cases come up, organizers help lift them up. So that's how we integrate our work. It's just one example. But I think, this is the kind of, I see this in a lot of different places. And I feel like if we could do this at a national level, we can be very effective as a community.
What about that, John, from your perch in DC? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done. It's going to be interesting, right? Because here in DC, we are going to have, even if it's not divided government, if you look at the Senate, it could be 50-50 with Vice President-elect Harris breaking the tie. But it then sort of, the question is sort of, what does that look like? And then I think the big question is like, how can all of us invest in the community more, right? Because you see the success in Atlanta, you see the success of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. How do you build on that? How do you build on Arizona? I think Nevada is another great example. I don't know if ACDC is on the call, but they've been so terrific in terms of how they've mobilized the community in Nevada. Those are examples that we would want to lift up, right? And sort of whether it is all of us providing more resources there, or it's just thinking about how to lift up those best practices. The other piece is sort of, how do we use economies of scale, right? I mean, I think that's something that the affiliation was able to do with the census work, is come up with shell templates of fact sheets and the like that, that can be put out into the community in translated materials Oh, ACDC, excellent. Put out and translate materials, and then have the community organizations tailor it for themselves, because we know that we here in DC aren't going to always have the answer to everything, but at least we can get started. We know that translations are hard, so at least we could start that base level and then work with everyone to go more from there. So those are some general thoughts. Obviously, we all need to talk further about what this means for 2021, because this is the start of a conversation.
Yeah, and hello AC/DC. As a rock and roll fan, the best org name ever. And Connie, how about your thoughts on when you kind of peek into next year?
Yeah, well, when I think about the work we do, and I think what's nice about our work is we have this national affiliation of advancing justice, and we have an umbrella of common goals and areas and values, but each of us do things in our own distinct way. So some have 50C4, some of us just have 50C3, some do litigation, some do legal services. And at our organization, I think of our work and how it's intertwined as sort of being a triangle. We have our direct services where we're working on the ground with clients predominantly who are limited English proficient, undocumented Asian Pacific Islanders, to provide direct legal and other health services. So we are working with domestic violence survivors, folks in detention centers, et cetera, and providing them with direct legal needs. Now, with that, we also have a policy and an impact litigation arm. And I think of those departments as providing sort of the systemic challenges and changes to make the system better. So the policy arm, to my mind, is sort of like the carrot, and the impact litigation is the stick to force systemic change when we're seeing issues that are in our direct services level, where our communities are either falling through the cracks or there's gaps for them. And so when I think about where we are moving forward, I mean, just so you understand, I've only been at the affiliation for 3 months. I just joined as the CEO of LA in August. And when I came in, honestly, I came in somewhat not planning to. I was very happy in my last job as an executive director of another nonprofit. But what I really felt was this personal conviction that I needed to come over because of what was happening with our government, what were happening with COVID scapegoating and anti-Asian discrimination being skyrocketing. And what I saw with the recognition around systemic racism and anti-Blackness after the murder of George Floyd. And all of these kinds of converged at a time where I thought, in 2020, damn it if I'm just going to sit back and not do anything. This is the time when all of us, I think a lot of us felt this need to lean in and really get involved with social justice. And so that was what brought me to where I am today with Advancing Justice LA. And so when I think about the future, some of the things that for me I'm passionate about are things like anti-Asian discrimination, because unfortunately we had a president who used terms like Kung flu and Wuhan virus, and we saw what impact that had in targeting our community. And I think we have a moment in time now to kind of push forward and look at how discrimination plays out and it rears its ugly head, both in our community as well as other communities of color. And I think it's an opportunity for solidarity, because when you saw the Asian community be discriminated against, I think a lot of more moderate or conservative Asians were sort of, there's the model minority myth, and they were often lulled into this view that we are somehow different than other communities of color. We're not going to be impacted the same way. And I think what 2020 has shown is no, we're still seen as outsiders. We are still being targeted. And we should also recognize other communities who are being targeted, and the Black community who has had to deal with police brutality and murder. That is something that we should care about. We should care about what's happening there, because how can we let society think that they're going to care about us? We need to be in solidarity. We need to be working together. So as I'm moving forward, some of the things that I was looking and bringing it back to the elections were, I was looking to see, was there a chilling effect at the voting centers? Was there any harassment or discrimination as Asians were being targeted? Or do they feel worried about even going to the voting centers? And I want to see, as we move forward, how does this COVID and what's happening continue to impact our community? How might, as we're going to start seeing housing evictions, how can we protect our community members from unlawful evictions that are based on racial animus? And where might there be potential for things like litigation in those areas?
Right, right. And glad my freezing did not in any way impede our discussion. Oh, technology sometimes. You know, before we get to the last question, you know, I'll just add my quick 2 cents about Chicago. You know, we, to Connie's point, when we look into next year, you know, we're looking at redistricting. My hope is that we can do a unity map effort, work with other communities of color, as Connie's mentioned, how essential that is. But we also look at our voting rights work and the work that we've done around our language justice campaign. Or even our Teach campaign. So our language justice, improving language access, we do feel the responsibility that although we have machine Democrats, we do believe that there's a really strong progressive community of organizers in Chicagoland that we can hopefully create ripple effects for the rest of the Midwest. And then with the Teach campaign, just making sure that our stories, our Asian American stories, are in our school curriculums in public schools, so that not just Asian American youth can see themselves reflected in our school curriculum, but hopefully their peers will start to view us as more than that perpetual foreigner. But to that point, and this is kind of a closing question for all of you, and Connie, I'll come back to you. How do we uplift the stories of our Asian American communities so that we can build that power, so that we can really see that transformative change start to happen?
Well, I think we started to hear some of the statistics that John shared about how powerful our Asian Pacific Islander community was at this election. You compare how there was so much more turnout with API voters in this election than there were 4 years ago. And I think we need to continue to highlight that and share those stories and explain how important those were in the critical swing states in some of the elections. I think one of the things that also I would say is when we think about uplifting the stories and how to build power from that, I would go back to what Stephanie and Chai were talking about the youth and talking about how to mobilize young people and share their stories. I will be the first to say that I am old and I am not good at social media. And that is something though that organizationally, that is no excuse. You know, that needs to change. We need to mobilize and uplift those stories using modern technology and reaching the millennials and Zoomers far better than a lot of our nonprofits have done in the past. You know, I still remember reading about how the K-pop stans and the Zoomers, you know, grabbed all of the tickets to the Trump rally. And so there were like all of those empty seats at the Trump rally. And I thought, that's amazing. You know, I could have never pulled that off. I could have never thought of it, but it was the young people, right? It was the teens and the young, you know, the 20-year-olds and the millennials who were doing that. And that is the kind of power of the movement that is so amazing to me. It's so inspiring. And that is what we need to capitalize on. And having worked in nonprofits for 20 plus years, I can tell you that sometimes I feel like it's like we're dinosaurs when it comes to technology and picking up on the new social media trends and how to use that. That's got to change. And that is how we will uplift the stories. We need to be on vlogs. We need to be on videos. We need to be on Twitter. We need to be on Instagram. We need to be doing it all. And we need to use that kind of power to, I think, really build our momentum and share the stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And for my part, at least I'm on WeChat, but it's true, right? I mean, it's interesting because how I think about this, and this is why I started with stats in some ways. It goes to Connie's point is stats will sometimes statistics will get you in the door. And that's even a place where we have problems. As you all know, when you looked at all of these presidential polls, all the polling that took place in the lead up to the election, there was typically breakdowns for, you know, male voters, female voters. There are often breakdowns for African Americans and Latino Americans. There was never, except for one exception, I think, of a breakdown for the Asian American community or the Native American community. And so we're literally invisible. So how do we tell our story if we're invisible? So one piece is we need to continue to educate our local media, our national media about the need for our visibility in statistics, et cetera. But then number two is Then once you get in the door, not to say that one is necessarily ahead of the other, then you have to be able to tell those stories. And this is again where the community organizing really comes into play, right? Because we know that getting our people to tell stories is a process. It's not, you can't just say to them, you need to go to the media, you need to train them, you need to get them comfortable with that. And that's a process that all of us have to engage in now, so that when the time comes that we are asking them to be a public face or to sign on to an op-ed, they're in a position of comfort and trust where they can do that. So yeah, it's a process that has to start now, but it's also a process that involves educating the media with statistics and with other things.
Yeah, I totally agree, John. I think for us, I was just thinking about just this week, Governor Newsom pardoned one of our clients, Danny Thongsi, who was actually a former staff person here, who was going to get deported because of a past criminal conviction. And when you look at the narratives, you know, some of the hardest narratives for us to fight against, even right now, you can already see the incoming administration saying, you know, we're going to stop the deportations of people who don't have violent felonies. Well, guess what? For our communities, that actually won't work. We have Southeast Asian folks who, you know, have been incarcerated and are, you know, came out of prison, turned their lives around. They have children, and they've been facing deportations. And this is something that we've been fighting under the Trump administration. And we can't go back or to an administration that actually now feels like that's okay. And these are the tough, you know, the controversial, difficult issues that are impacting the most vulnerable in our community, right? And so the way that we've done it in California is people tell their own stories. And they get to, you know, we lift that up, and that is our job. And it is our job to challenge, you know, the narratives that are coming from people who should be our allies, right? And to push the envelope. And I agree with you, Connie. I think the youth are, they are far bolder than the rest of us. And they are, you know, they're asking for things that, you know, many of us didn't even feel like were possible. And so, you know, I think one of the things that we've seen in California is when you actually do lift up the stories of directly impacted people, and those folks are leading in the work. And on our staff, we have, you know, formerly incarcerated folks who are leading the work, co-leading the work with our attorneys. And so that's, I mean, and that's, I think one of the things that we need to do as a partnership, and what we're thinking of too is, you know, it's not just the 5 geographies that are reflected in our partnership, it's the rest of you. And lifting up stories on the ground, you know, and providing that infrastructure, providing support, that's our role. And it's definitely a partnership with you all and a partnership with other communities of color. You know, as we grow, it's very important for us to bring our communities along. So I'll just
Aarti, thank you for that. And before I pass it on to Connie to close us out, you know, my one penny is to Aarti's point, as we look about and we start reading about federal immigration next year, it's got to work for all of our community, right? We are more than just business owners and value add to the economy for white America, right? And so I hope, and I look forward to working with my colleagues here and some of you on with us right now, you know, fighting that fight and defending family-based immigration and making sure that any idea works for all members of our community. So with that, I want to thank you all, and I want to turn it to Connie to close this out.
Thank you all for being here today. I apologize that we went a little bit over, but appreciate you all sticking through with us. There were, you know, I think as Aarti said, we want to work with the larger community. It's not just our 5 affiliates in our little geographical areas that we're focused on. So we just want to remind everyone that, you know, this is building the power of the margins. We want to bring our community front and center and continue to work together. So whether that is census, which you're speaking to the choir in the chat box when you talked about disaggregated data, I agree with you on that. Whether it's immigration, affirmative action, voting rights, redistricting, these are all issues that we will continue to prioritize, and look forward to continuing our partnership with all of you and building that so that way we can have a larger collective impact.
Thank you all, and take care.
Thank you.
And
Bye.
go Georgia. Let's
Bye.
go.
Woohoo.
Go, Steph.